Hi everyone, it's William. I've decided to go ahead and do another of the 1907 diary entries. This is another short one, so putting the 1921 diary series on hold just a little longer. As I mentioned before, there are only a few diary entries left for 1907. So if you've been following this all along, you know that when he started out as a 14-year-old in January 1914, Dmitri was being very disciplined in his diary keeping and writing every day, and that sort of gradually eroded. And then when he was in the Crimea, he sort of made a pledge to himself that he was going to return to being disciplined with his diary entries, and he did at first. So, but now, unfortunately, he's giving it up. After the last diary entry will be the 18th of October, and I think life just kind of caught up with him as a 16-year-old, and his education, his lessons are clearly getting more intensive, and he's in Moscow with lots of things going on. So, unfortunately, our friend is leaving us in the lurch for a little while, and in 1908 we'll have some letters, but not diary entries. Anyway, in the previous diary entry of the 11th October, he had gone off to the theater to see the opera The Queen of Spades, which he'd been very much looking forward to, and he did like it, but the whole day was kind of a wash for him. I mean, it was kind of ruined because the poor chap, he had this just blinding headache. He did his whole school day and went to the opera, but he had this horrible headache. So today, unfortunately, the headache is still with us. And here we go. I should say, so it's 12th October, Moscow, 1907, and a Friday. I got up a little later today. I didn't sleep well at all and got up with a very heavy and aching head. It has been decided that tomorrow we will go to Usovo and we'll probably do some shooting. They're setting up a little blind for Wilhelm. Tyotia has given us permission to bring Uncle's gun, which we will do. I had lessons from 9 to 11. In my Russian lesson, I was half guessing. At 11, I went to Neskuchnoye with GM. Lunch, as always, was at 1, after which I had lessons until 6. That was, to be honest, quite difficult because my head was still hurting, but let us hope that it will be completely gone tomorrow for the trip to Ilinskaya. Maria ended up going to the theater with us yesterday, while poor Wilhelm had to endure Tyotia's boring company, 9:30. Okay, so that's interesting. Boy, it's cold today. It's a good thing for me that this is a short diary entry. So, last time I brought up the issue of whether Dmitri had not told anybody about this headache, or perhaps had not told them how bad it was. And, just speculation on my part, but thinking, well, maybe he was afraid that Tyotia, Aunt Ella, would say, well, then, it's not a good idea for you to go to the theater, and he'd really been looking forward to it. And, one of the benefits of having read all of the that I know of, all of the available diaries that Dmitri left behind, are to be able to have a little context on all of this, or a little overview, I should say, of it. So as an adult, you would see some of this same thing, where he would try to keep pain and illness to himself as much as he possibly could. He wasn't always successful with that, and so that was kind of in sharp contrast with another habit he had. Habit's not the right word, but of suffering from psychosomatic illnesses and letting people know about those and being distressed and seeking help. Whereas when he was in pain, when he had something like this headache that God knows could have been serious, although it wasn't, or for instance, when he broke his ankle in a riding accident in 1920, and he wouldn't go to a doctor, he wouldn't see anyone, he was very resistant to all of that. And then later, and he had some residual consequences from that, from not having that treated by a doctor. And later, when he had what I think was a kidney stone, he kind of, macho is the wrong word, but he kind of seemed to have this attitude that men should not complain about pain, and they shouldn't try to let on how much pain they were in. And, I've encountered that with Russian friends who grew up, of course, during the Soviet period, who talk about, if you went to the emergency room or to the doctors with a really bad to-the-bone cut or something like that, the doctors would say, well, you should just deal with this, or they would give you stitches without offering any anesthetic, and that it was different for women. But for men, the doctors, at least these stories that my friends have told me, were very disdainful of any man who acted like he needed some kind of relief from pain. So maybe that was a characteristic, probably, that existed before the revolution. And Grand Duke or no Grand Duke, Dmitri had that mindset when it came to things that caused pain as opposed to other kind of illnesses. Okay, so he's just going to go forward with his day, and it has been decided, meaning that Ella has given her permission, and those involved have made up their mind about the details. So they're all going to go the next day on Saturday to Usovo, which was a smaller manor attached to, some distance from, but attached to the Ilinskaya estate. And they would probably be doing some shooting, but I guess probably the whole reason for going was just to show it to Prince Wilhelm, Maria's fiancé, because it was really where Dmitri and Maria grew up. And so naturally they would want to show it to him. And when Dmitri says they're setting up a little blind for Wilhelm, well, I just don't know how to translate that word. So it's zagon, and you can say enclosure would probably be more the conventional translation. So I'm sort of going out on a limb and saying a blind, like a duck blind, but I don't hunt. So maybe blinds are only for ducks. I don't know. But they're setting up this station, you could say, for Wilhelm. I would assume they're hunting for birds, and I would assume that this gun that Dmitri simply refers to as a gun that belonged to Uncle Sergei was probably a shotgun. But that's an assumption on my part, and they asked Ella's permission. And as you know, she has taken over from her late husband in being quite a controlling person when it comes to the kids. But still, it was her beloved late husband. So, in this instance, it's appropriate, I think, that they don't just take the gun, that they ask her and get her permission. Okay, so Dmitri had prepared so carefully for his Russian lesson a couple of diary entries ago, and then for whatever reason his Russian teacher hadn't come. And so it's kind of a pity, and now he's left, as he says, half guessing. But apparently that went all right, and even if he didn't tell people about how bad his headache was, it was probably apparent. That would be hard to cover up. All right, and then he's going off to do his physical exercise by walking to the grounds of the Neskuchny Palace. So the word in Russian, dvorets, which means palace, is masculine. And the masculine verb ending, the masculine adjective ending would be, in this instance, ni, neskuchny, the unboring or not boring palace. But for some reason, and that's how Dmitri has referred to it in previous diary entries, but for some reason this time he's saying Neskuchnaya. And he also refers, of course, to Ilinskaya. And so I just want to point out to non-Russian speakers that Russian words can sometimes seem so difficult to pronounce. Part of the problem, though, is the Library of Congress transliteration system, which is really outdated and was never, in my opinion, any good to begin with, because it doesn't recognize the pronunciation of words. It just does a direct transliteration of letters from Cyrillic to Latin letters, even if those letters are pronounced differently. So I will never understand that. So you have people looking at the words on paper and quite reasonably saying, oh, this is Neskuchno, this is Ilinsko, this is Tsarsko Selo. But whenever you see at the end of a Russian word that OE, you should insert a Y between the O and the E to give it the proper phonetic spelling. So you see that O and E, and you know it's going to be pronounced Oya, Neskuchnoya, Ilinskoya, Tsarskoya. So I hope that wasn't too pedantic on my part, but when I'm reading words from any language that I'm not familiar with, I would prefer to know the correct pronunciation if I ever have to say it out loud than to just be misled about that or in the dark about it. Okay, let's see. He's hoping that the headache will be gone before they leave tomorrow. Here's what I wanted to just mention, is that it surprises me that Maria went to the theater with them. She must really have needed to get away from Wilhelm for a while, or to have really wanted to see that particular opera, one or the other, I suppose, because she leaves her poor fiance in the lurch. He is in mourning for his grandfather, or great-grandfather, I think grandfather, who died about a month before, the Grand Duke of Baden, I believe. And so he can't go to the theater. He's officially in mourning. And so, the assumption had been that Maria would stay with him, but by God, she's going to go, and she does go. And so then, as Dmitri says, well, poor Wilhelm had to endure Tyota's boring company. Yeah, so, so it goes. I'm sure it was not a good evening for him. I'm trying to imagine what that would be like to be left while your fiancé and future brother-in-law go off to the opera and have fun. I personally do enjoy the opera. I'm sure there are some of you out there that think that, an opera would be the very last thing that would be fun, and maybe you'd prefer Tyota's boring company. But I guess it's the novelist in me that very much likes this scene of this young man, Wilhelm, being left alone all evening with a nun, for God's sake. What must that? Granted, a very cosmopolitan nun, a Grand Duchess nun, but still, it's rather comical. Okay, so we will see. I still haven't quite made up my mind whether the next video will be 1907 again. It probably will, because these are, I think, until the 15th. These are very short diary entries. But the next one, at any rate, will be the one where they head off for Ilinska and Usovo for the remainder of the weekend. So thanks for watching, and come back for that, and hopefully I'll see you next time.